Are we alone? Until now, we inhabitants of Earth have observed the stars looking for evidence of another type of life. But the truth is not out there. It's here. Since the Second World War, the British government has been watching us, watching the sky. While hidden within the Ministry of Defense, there are thousands of reports of UFO sightings, many of which remain unresolved. But now, after decades of secrecy, these files have seen the light. And for the first time, the truth about UFOs in the UK has been revealed. Almost a collision. I can't conjecture what that was. The truth is that I can't. Even today, I don't know what it was. A World War II pilot almost crashed into something. I don't usually talk about it much with people, only with my closest friends. The radar detected an unidentified object, new evidence about one of the most famous UFO cases, that of Roswell. If I could prove that the origin of any of these UFOs did not come from Earth, the entire world's belief system would change completely. Strange stories still unexplained that lead us to wonder if there really is life out there. UFOs in England. New tests. What are the 3 words with the most searches on the internet? Perhaps the first 2 will not catch us by surprise. UFOs are deeply rooted in the popular imagination. But few myths have involved government investigations so much, and they have been as monitored and covered up as UFOs. Someone who knows well how seriously the British authorities treat sightings is Nick Pope, former employee of the Ministry of Defense. Starting in 1952, it was decided that it was really needed a small permanent unit to study and investigate the phenomenon of UFOs. And it was already in the 50s and until 2009, when the Ministry of Defense had a small project dedicated to the mystery of UFOs. Bob was in charge of this department in the 90s and helped with thousands of files that the ministry had assembled for decades. Now that these have come out of hiding, key witnesses to UFO sightings tell their own version. And both the experts on the subject, the skeptics, and those who do believe, they wonder what the Defense Ministry has been keeping secret. Journalist David Clark was the first to convince the ministry to bring the files to light. Thanks to the records, we can observe that people have seen in the sky thousands of strange objects in the British Isles. There is no doubt that people see things in the sky that they cannot identify. It has always been like this. Case 1. Pilot almost collided with unknown object. January 6, 1995. The experienced pilots of a Boeing 737 with 60 passengers on the Milan-Manchester route report that they almost crashed. This is the incredible sighting of an unidentified flying object that drove the authorities crazy. In the files of the Ministry of Defense, there are a large number of incidents involving aircraft that almost collided with unidentified flying objects. The most impressive of all was the report made by the crew of a British Airways 737 Speedbird 5061 flying over the Pennine Mountains, 14 kilometers. They were about to enter this cloud bank. The sky was clear, and there was good visibility. Suddenly, the co-pilot said he had seen a kind of Christmas tree with lights coming towards them. Look at that. He was flying so low and so close to them that he automatically ducked thinking they were going to collide. The object zoomed very close. Immediately, the co-pilot looked at the captain and said, "Did you see that?" And the captain answered, "Yes, I have seen it." Immediately, the pilots radioed the Manchester control tower. The crew of any aircraft are very concerned about the possible damage that their reputation could suffer if they began to be known as those who see flying saucers. So it is. Very interesting that in this case, and despite that the two pilots decided that when landed, they were going to present an official report so that the authorities in charge of the civil aviation will carry out a detailed investigation, which is what happened. It is the first time that the Ministry of Defense files show how this extraordinary event triggered a large-scale investigation led by investigator of air collisions, Anthony Booth. To begin with, it was something very strange, since it was the only case that I remember the 7 years that I was working in that specific department in which I have to face something like that. We speak with the pilots, with both of them. We observe the recordings, radar and transcripts of the pilots' voices, as well as recordings of what said air traffic control. We've looked for anything that might shed some light on what that object could be. The pilots do not want to speak publicly about the collision that almost occurred, but the Ministry of Defense files record what they said at the time to Anthony Booth. At first, I focused my attention on the shining shield that it was in front of us, but something on the sides distracted me. The object had numerous small white lights, like a Christmas tree. He was going at a very high speed, and although it was impossible to calculate the distance, it was very close. There is a transcript of the conversation between the captain of the 737 and those in ground control. Manchester, I speak from Speedbird 5061. Something has happened over us, on the flank, right at high speed. And those from Manchester immediately answered them. Nothing is seen on the radar. Was it a plane? Well, it had lights. It passed us on the starboard side very quickly. Did those from Manchester ask above you? Yes, a little above us, yes. Those from Manchester advised them to keep their eyes wide open in case they saw anything more, but they saw nothing. That object had to be very fast. He must have been very fast or headed down very quickly when he passed you. Okay, let's go there. The Manchester Control Tower could not find anything on radar. According to radar expert Doug Robb, this fact is extraordinary. The probability that such activity will not be detected is remote, since several radars operate in the area, and any move at those levels should, almost without a doubt, have generated a response on the radar. But nothing was seen. So what was it that the radar didn't detect? Defense Ministry records show that investigators and pilots considered all possibilities. Do you think it was a hang glider? At night, it would be suicide. A hang glider wouldn't attract the attention of a normal radar, right? A comet? No, I don't think so. A meteor could indeed be detected if the radar was looking in just the right direction when that piece of debris passed by at high speed. A military object? Maybe, but I didn't recognize it. And we are close to a major airport. It should have appeared on the radar. A spy plane? I don't think so. It didn't look like a stealth plane. Normal radars sometimes fail to detect stealth aircraft. A spy plane would hide and not fly in an area where it could be seen, and even less so in an area with so many airliners. A UFO? Don't talk nonsense. Don't know. The pilots didn't lie. It is true that they had an unusual experience that they still cannot explain today. The records show that the investigation seriously looked at the possibility that this was military activity, but found no evidence from any official source. It is quite unlikely that a flight of these characteristics would take place so close to an international airport with so much air traffic. So what was that object? Next, we will learn about the conclusion hidden in the Ministry of Defense since 1995 that Anthony Booth's investigation reached. In many of the incidents we investigate, we usually reach some definitive conclusion, but in this case we could not. We had to prepare a cause and risk calculation, and neither the cause nor the risk were calculated. Incalculable degree of risk, incalculable cause. This is a very, very difficult statement to find in an official air report, as it says in summary that we have no idea what that was. I would like to know what they will say when we return. I guess they'll laugh at us. At the end of the summary in which this investigation is collected, there is no doubt that both pilots saw an object and that it was of sufficient size to give rise to an official aerial report. Unfortunately, both the nature and identity of the object remain a mystery. Speculating about extraterrestrial activities, no matter how fascinating it may seem, is not within the scope of this team, so those interested in this field should do so. According to some ufologists, such as Nick Pope, the absence of real conclusions leaves important questions to be resolved. It seems something extraordinary to me. UFO doesn't mean flying alien craft, but it's clear that to some people, whether it's the captain and co-pilot, the Civil Aviation Authority investigators, or the defense minister, it's clear that someone would be thinking, maybe just maybe this is something extraterrestrial. Land. I can't conjecture what that was. The truth is that I can't. Still today? Today I don't know what it was. The only thing I know is that we cannot think that we know everything in these times. There may be things we don't know. The investigation into the incident. Manchester shows us the seriousness with which the Ministry of Defense treats sightings. Still unexplained. However, the Department of Ufology has been receiving reports for decades of pilots. The files reveal sightings during World War II, and in some cases, these were so important that they were transferred to the highest levels of the government. British. The UFO files that have recently come to light confirm what many experts suspected, that the British government has been investigating sightings without explanation since the Second World War. I don't usually discuss it much with the people, just my closest friends, who may have experienced it while they flew during the war. Case 2. Close encounter inside a bomber. Spring. 1944. Great Britain unleashed heavy bombing raids on Germany. Rumors of strange, unidentified missiles reached the ears of the highest officials and were considered a threat to public morality. Defense Ministry records show that the order to keep them secret came from the highest levels. These were sightings like the one experienced by the gunner Bernard Dye. This here is the diary that I was writing when I was at war. I'm going to read what I posted on April 28. Operation Essen. 300 planes flew over Essen. Dye then wrote about the most extraordinary sighting. Unidentified objects, which I described as huge balls of fire. It is the first time that Bernard Dye. He talks on television about what happened that night. We were leaving the most dangerous area, and we were back to Biggen Hall, our base. We were heading to France. And everything seemed calm. Suddenly, I saw 3 fireballs coming from below, and I told our pilot, Arthur Horton, over the intercom. A few seconds later, a gunner behind them, Brian Harper, saw 2 more fireballs. At that moment, Arthur became a little worried and asked, "Were they soldiers?" They weren't soldiers, they were fireballs coming towards us. I told Arthur to make an evasive maneuver. Course crew, starboard, come on, come on. We were going more than 400 kilometers per hour. The plane shook like a leaf, and still that thing didn't continue. The pilot was afraid of burning out the engine. Our engineer Dave said, "But what about the engine?" "Don't worry about the engine, ma'am. Go on, or anything like that." The words were somewhat rude. The crew and I were very scared to see those balls. After traveling a very short distance, these 5 red objects slowed down. And the red lights simply disappeared into the darkness around us. And we returned home safely. When we returned to Militant Hall, our base, well, it's common for intelligence agents to ask each team. They didn't stop laughing at us, which bothered the pilot, who replied that they would not laugh so much if they had been sitting inside the plane with us. What does Gunner Bernard Dye think those objects were? I didn't know what to think, but I thought it was just a new weapon the Germans had invented. But Bernard Dye is not the only one. During World War II, another aircraft crew reported unexplained sightings. And we now know that at least one of those reports was deleted, and that the order to do so came directly from the top. Wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill was so frightened of the report leaking that he ordered it not to see the light of day for 50 years. Mr. Churchill stated that the UFO incident should remain classified for at least 50 years and would be reviewed by a future Prime Minister. Churchill's order specifically referred to a sighting near the end of the war by a British aircrew returning from a reconnaissance mission in Germany. In the files it appears, "My grandfather was in a debate about an unexpected incident suffered by the crew of a British Air Force bomber." Ministry of Defense records show that the story originated thanks to the grandson of one of Churchill's bodyguards, who was present at an urgent meeting between the Prime Minister and the American captain of the Allied troops, General Eisenhower, who discussed this incident together. He wrote to see if the minister could confirm this story that this man, who was a bodyguard, was present at a conversation between Winston Churchill and Eisenhower about a mysterious incident experienced by the crew of a Royal Air Force reconnaissance plane. They saw a metallic object that appeared next to their plane and followed the plane and behaved in a way that was completely inexplicable for it to be a German plane or any other type of Nazi plane or flying object that they were aware of. A leading aircraft expert was also at the meeting. He ruled out the possibility that it was a missile, since missiles cannot match their speed to that of a plane that flies more slowly and then accelerates again. Churchill made sure that this matter did not go any further. Another person present at the meeting raised the possibility that it was an unidentified flying object, prompting Churchill to announce that the incident should be classified immediately. But the file goes further. One extraordinary line explains Churchill's terror of the public's reaction to the sighting of this UFO if it ever became public. This event must be classified immediately, as it would cause a collective psychosis among the population and destroy belief in the church. However, the file also reveals that it was not the first time that Churchill was involved in this type of sightings. In October 1912, there were sightings of mysterious lights in the sky above the CERN's shipyards in Essex. Winston Churchill was the First Lord of the Admiralty, and he had to deal with this matter. Furthermore, Churchill had to admit in Parliament that he could not explain what had been seen. The records show that once the war was over, Churchill became interested in the unexplained sightings. After the Washington, D.C. sightings in 1952, this topic made many front pages. Winston Churchill became interested again and sent a memo to the Secretary of State for the Air. "What's all this about flying saucers? What can it mean? What is the truth? Send me a report as soon as possible." Until now, Bernard Dye did not know that there had been other sightings during the Second World War that Churchill wanted to keep secret in such a critical period. We showed him the Ministry of Defense file on Churchill that had just been made public. After reading this report, I get the feeling that it is identical to what we witnessed and saw that night. I hadn't heard of this before, but I'm not surprised they told it to you since it happened during the war, and it is clear that these objects existed. It is interesting that during the 1940s, airplane crew members lived through numerous sightings, and there are several files in the Royal Air Force National Archives that detail some of these reports, which they called rocket-type phenomena, but they could never explain them. At the end of the war, when the pilots were informed of the Luftwaffe, they said that they too had seen similar things and that they thought, which were secret weapons of the Allies. Is there any explanation for what the plane crew saw? Dave Clark has his own theory. They simply thought that the air crew had suffered from erroneous perceptions. They were waiting for enemy action and were too charged with adrenaline. Were they UFOs or not? The records show that World War II leaders were desperate for the sightings not to come to light. The following file reveals how even decades later, the British government was still very scared about this issue. Were UFO photos hidden? Many UFO experts believe that the Pitlochry file illustrates one of the most important ufological conspiracies of recent times. These are photographs in which an unidentified flying object appears over a remote valley in Scotland. The photographs were sent to the Ministry of Defense, but they mysteriously disappeared. Journalist Mark Pilkington has been tracking these images for years. The photographs of Pitlochry at the Ministry of Defense date back to 4 August 1990, when two witnesses on the A9 near Calvane, situated next to Pitlochry, claimed to have seen a large, diamond-shaped aircraft in the sky for about 10 minutes and took 6 photographs of it. The object they claimed to have seen was accompanied by 2 planes that the ministry later identified as 2 Harriers. The author of the photographs was never identified. He sent the 6 snapshots to Scotty's Daily Record newspaper. The newspaper did not bring it to light, but instead referred it to the Ministry of Defense for investigation. The Ministry of Defense made its own copies of the photographs that from that moment, they disappeared. According to the files, they sent the original negatives back to the newspaper, who inexplicably never brought this issue to light and never published the photographs. Allegedly, the newspaper returned the snapshots to the 2 men, whose names have been redacted from the file, so we cannot ask them. It's a mystery upon another mystery. All that remains in the file is a photocopy of the alleged photographs. From there, the experts outlined what had been seen. However, Nick Pope had the photos and the original file in his hands when he worked for the Ministry of Defense. Both the Defense Intelligence Agency, such as the Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center, they analyzed it carefully and came to a clear and unanimous conclusion. The object was real. It measured about 25 or 30 meters in diameter. I sat next to my defense intelligence counterpart at a briefing about UFOs, and we talked at length about that photograph. This topic was of interest to defense because obviously they could do things that we couldn't. We wanted that technology. The Ministry of Defense was determined to downplay the issue. There are some interesting instructions written by the press office of the Ministry of Defense. The defensive lines to follow if these photographs reached the newspapers and they were asked about them. There is a section that basically says that we have seen the photographs and no definitive conclusion has been reached about the elongated diamond-shaped object. And if they feel pressured by the media, they should say that all sightings are referred to staff in the departments responsible for UK air defense. During his time working for the ministry, Pope had an enlarged copy of the photograph hanging in his office until his superior personally removed it. One suggestion was that it was a secret prototype of an American spy plane. My section chief convinced himself that it was surely some type of secret plane or airplane and ordered me to take it down. We know from the files that there was a lot of internal controversy about whether the Americans were flying that incredible spy plane, and if that was true, why hadn't they asked for permission to fly that plane over British airspace? Journalist Mark Pilkington believes that events at the time could have influenced what people thought they saw. This happened just 2 days after the first Gulf War broke out, and, of course, there was a large deployment of planes flying to the Middle East. The United Kingdom was a kind of intermediate stop, a kind of launching pad for many of those planes. The Ministry of Defense was worried about how public opinion would react, just as Churchill was 4 decades earlier. Did the British Ministry of Defense try to hide the Pitlochry photographs? It is possible that the ministry destroyed these images, possibly because they believed that it was an American spy plane of which they did not have, or rather we were not aware of. Or perhaps, this object was never really explained. because we simply did not want to suffer the embarrassment of saying that there may be things in our airspace with speeds and maneuvers that exceed what we know, and yet we cannot explain them. However, we are all basing ourselves, it must be made clear, on a very distorted and blurred black and white image, which for all I know, could have been painted by a child with paints. Mark Pilkington is still searching for the authentic Pitlochry photographs to find out what tested the British Ministry of Defence. However, 6 years later, off the east coast of Britain, another UFO sighting sparks another large-scale military investigation and a major challenge for the Secretary of State for Defense. In 1996, the Ministry of Defense suffered a serious breach in the defense of the United Kingdom, caused by a UFO in East Anglia. The files reveal that not only the police, the Coast Guard, and the Air Force were involved, but that the Ministry of Defense was called to take off fighter jets. I am very concerned about a recent incident off the coast of East Anglia, in which an unidentified flying object was sighted and sought by several different military radar systems. Why didn't our planes take off? It was one of the biggest scares in the history of ufology, and it all started on a quiet October night on the East Coast. Case 4. Takeoff. It was the police officers who first called reporting the matter. There's an excerpt about that. Early this morning, the police saw a strange red and green light in the sky heading southeast from Skegness. It seemed to be high up, just above the Wash estuary. The police patrol reported the sighting to the station sergeant. I immediately called the Skegness control room, and they passed it on to Grey Yarmouth Maritime and Coastal Rescue Service, believing it could be a sea-related incident. We received a warning at around 3:15 local time from the Skegness police, who saw that light heading southeast. We didn't really know what it was at the time. We immediately reported everything to the local area defense radars to see if they could see anything. The call reached Knidish Head, the most important air defense center in southern England. Plugs by radar has found something at coordinates 221 degrees. They realized that there was a flicker on one of the radars that they couldn't identify. It wasn't an airplane. Would the mysterious flashing of the radar and the strange lights that the police saw be the same? They started receiving panic calls from people. No, they are not invading us. A call alerted navigation to watch for more strange lights. Then a ship arrived. In B, we know Yarmouth. We are seeing some lights above the Wash estuary. The ship that was at sea, the Conicos, was more or less in that area. At 3:50, the Leland Police Patrol runs to the roof of the police station to record the strange lights, and manages to record a 5-minute sequence in which a single motionless ray of white light can be seen. News about the UFO sighting spreads quickly. The transcript of the conversation between the Coast Guard and the police and the ship's workers was leaked to the local press. Suddenly, it became a famous UFO-related incident that caught the attention of the local parliamentarian. The sighting gained so much traction and popularity that Labour MP Martin Redmond himself became involved and had to answer very difficult questions. Martin Redmond said, "Let's see, you have police officers seeing UFOs, British Air Force officers following them by radar, and you still haven't managed to find that plane to take a look at it." There is a copy of the letter that Martin Redmond sent to the Honorable Michael Portillo, Secretary of State for Defense. It says like this: "I am very concerned about an incident that occurred off the coast of East Anglia recently, in which an unidentified flying object was sighted and was being sought by several different military radar systems. I'm interested in finding out what people saw. My main concerns arise from the excessive confusion that an event like this caused. In reality, he is attacking the Ministry of Defense, asking why you didn't react. What did the British Air Force do? This has hurt them a lot. The records portray it as a time of chaos." The letter sparked an investigation at the ministry to explain why the Air Force did not act. Doug Robb was then the head of night operations. We showed him what the ministry had discovered, and the conclusions did not surprise him. This diagram shows the graph produced by the radar in the Boston area on that night. And, in conclusion, it shows that Class B did detect the object, but it was not moving and was on the ground. After investigating it, they came to the conclusion that it was a church tower, the Boston Stump, as it is popularly known. The files state categorically that this was the culprit. This church is known as the Boston Stump in the aviation world, since it sometimes appears on some radars, depending on its propagation conditions. They said this was a phenomenon unrelated to the bright, motionless lights seen by Boston and Skegness police and the ship's crew. The report concluded that the order for the fighters to take off was not justified, much to the chagrin of MP Martin Redmond. Planes could take off if an object about 500 kilometers away approached at high speed, but they will not take off because of something immobile on the ground. I mean, what threat was there? If what the radar detected was really a church, what were the mysterious lights that the police and those on the ship saw? The Ministry of Defense scrutinized the video footage recorded by the police. It looks like a distant light coming from the sky. The Ministry of Defense sent the sequence to the Royal Greenwich Observatory for analysis. That report has remained locked up since 1996 in the Ministry of Defense. UFO and astronomy expert Ian Ritpath saw both the findings and the police video. If we watch the video, what we will see is a bright point of light that remains motionless and appears to be doing nothing. That's why what I believe is that even the most qualified witnesses can fall into a very basic error, which is confusing the celestial bodies. The one that confuses the most is usually Venus. In fact, it is known as the Queen of UFOs, because at night it is the brightest body in the sky behind the sun and moon, and that is possibly what the police saw. He also believes there is an explanation for the color of the lights. When the zoom is very close, it is very common for the camera to stop focusing, and that is why. You can see strange figures, which are nothing more than the camera's diaphragm itself. But this also does not explain what the tanker crew saw. The ministry's investigation claims that they saw a light that was not going in the direction of Venus, and that confused them. These lights still have no explanation. But expert Ian Ritpath believes there is an answer. The object that those on the ship saw to the north, I believe, is another bright star, called Vega, which blinks and emits lights of multiple colors. Skeptical UFO expert Dave Clark believes there is a reason this incident became so relevant. This happened in 1996, when the X-Experience series had its highest popularity rates on television. That was the year 1996, and also 97, in which the most reports were received since 1978. So is the East Anglia case now closed? Or will new mysteries emerge like those that happened in one of Britain's most famous cases, and that refuses to be forgotten, the Roswell of Wales? Case 5. The Roswell Case of Wales. In 1974, thousands of people experienced a violent earthquake in North Wales. At the same time, lights were seen falling from the sky. Some ufologists think a UFO collided, and that an attempt was made to hide the case, known as the Roswell case in Wales. They were very loud noises, yes. Suddenly the whole house vibrated. The house began to shake. It seemed like it was right above us. I thought the house was falling. There was a light coming from the mountains, over there. January 24, 1974, 9:50 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. 5 incredibly glowing bodies are seen crossing the sky. New data has been revealed that further fuels the mystery. One of the most important witnesses of the so-called Bergen incident is Hugh Loy, who at that time was the son of a farmer and was only 14 years old. Just after 8:30 p.m., Hugh's family felt the devastating earthquake. It was a terrifying experience. Even today, 40 years later, Hugh remembers that day as if it were yesterday. I heard like a sharp knock, and immediately, everything began to move very violently. The light flickered and the lights in the photograph that was on the television looked like snowflakes on the screen. We were all very scared. We had no idea what was happening. Enoch said, "It must have been an explosion." And then the phone started. It started ringing. The neighbors called us to ask us, "Have you felt that?" And suddenly, about 20 minutes later, we heard someone knocking on the door. "Good afternoon." Good afternoon, they were police officers. They said that they had been informed that a plane had crashed in the Bergen Mountains and that they needed to commandeer our Land Rover to get there. I was 14, so I said, "Enoch, you better drive." And we continued up the mountain for almost a kilometer, maybe more than a kilometer. So we got out of the car, stopped for a moment, grabbed our flashlights. Everything was very quiet and very dark. There was nothing to see there. "Hand out the flashlights." And one of them said, "There is nothing here. Everything is very quiet. You can't see anything. It's better that you go down." So we were going to get back into the cars when we saw a very bright white light. "What's that?" "In the valley, just behind those trees, to the left." In the valley, between those two mountains, we saw a very bright white light coming out as if from the earth upwards. And it was very, very bright. I knew it was coming from the earth, but we couldn't see what was emitting it because it was very far down in the valley, hidden. It didn't look like the light from a plane crash. It was too white to have fire nearby, and it lasted very little, 20 seconds at most. They searched the entire mountain, but there was no sign of a plane crash. What was that light then? Ufologist Andy Roberts has been investigating the Bergen UFO for years. Despite being skeptical, he recognizes that there is a central mystery that concerns another key witness in the incident. In a nearby town called Yanderville, there lived a nurse named Pat Evans. There she also felt the explosion, and since she was a nurse and had the necessary medical equipment, she thought that if a plane had crashed, she could go there and help until the emergency services arrived. Pat Evans was with two teenage daughters about 4 miles from Huloy when the ground shook. What was that? It sounded like a plane. So he took the girls, put them in the car, drove for about 10 or 15 minutes until he reached the 4391 road, expecting to see a crashed plane engulfed in flames. This is the road I was driving on. It's a road he knew very well, so he had no problems getting here at night. Obviously, she was expecting to see what she thought had been an aerial disaster. And just when she peeked out the other side of that grove of trees, what she saw left her absolutely speechless. Far away in the mountains to the left was a huge ball of vibrant red, white, and orange lights. Whatever it was too far from the road to reach on foot. Pat and her two daughters were stunned watching the ball of lights slowly changing color. He commented that it was half the size of the moon and that around this object there were lights from flashlights and moving cars. And he realized that no plane had crashed and that some people were there looking at whatever that thing was. Then she came home in her car, got into bed, and to this day, she is still bewildered and doesn't know what that was. What did Pat Evans and Hugh Loy see that night? We reveal that not even the arrival of the mysterious men in black can answer all the questions. The unidentified sightings of Pat Evans and Hugh Loy in Bergen, Wales, in 1974, have now passed into popular memory. The recently revealed Ministry of Defense files have added even more mystery. Investigators from the British Geological Survey were sent to Bergen to investigate an earthquake that had registered 3.5 on the Richter scale. Immediately after the earthquake, we started receiving many quite complex reports of lights in the sky and on the hill. So I would get a small team of people together to go there and ask people what they had seen, heard, or felt. The British Geological Department team began to be known in Bergen as the Men in Black, since they were dressed in dark official-looking suits and went door to door. Some people seem to think this whole event was somewhat suspicious, and that we, simple scientists of the geological department, we had something to do with the suspicious events happening here. Files containing Chris' notes recall his interview with nurse Pat Evans, who saw the unidentified light. Here I have the notes I took when I spoke with Pat Evans. She felt the shaking, but she was also very worried about the light she saw in the sky. He thought it was a big red light that shone like fire. This is a copy of one of the maps that we and our team used when we were in the area talking to people, and therefore we were able to mark on the map the exact point where we did that interview, and therefore what exactly that person saw, heard, and felt. This previously unreleased map from the British Geological Survey is a revelation. It shows the anomalous lights that Pat Evans and Hugh Loy saw. They both appeared in the same small area of the hillside at the same time. Ufologist Andy Roberts returns to the same spot on the hillside where Pat and his daughters saw the UFO and where Pat Evans told his story to Andy Roberts in 1998. When I took Pat Evans up this mountain road in 1998 and she told me her story, I photographed her. And the photograph I took showed her pointing to the place where she saw what she saw in 1974. And judging by the photograph, he was pointing that way, which is where we know the police and farmers were searching that night. Pat Evans was on the road between Jenganek and Wellspool, which is just beyond that forest. So if she was there, she probably saw the same light that we saw, because that was the boundary line. I'm really sure that it's the same light that she gave. Recent files show the Ministry of Defense's explanation for the sudden explosion and mysterious lights. Subsequent searches on the slopes in question reveal no signs of impact. However, the Meteorological Office considers that these sightings may have been caused by a bolide, that is, a meteor, which enters the Earth's atmosphere and burns up before reaching the ground. A private investigation carried out on behalf of the British Astronomical Society concludes, however, that the meteor may in fact have disintegrated over Manchester and that its appearance was preceded at 8.30 by an unconnected tremor in the Bergen Mountains. So they said once again that there were two things that happened coincidentally on the same night. There is a meteor burning in the atmosphere and also an earth tremor. So is this incredible coincidence, two distinct natural phenomena, a meteor shower and an earthquake occurring simultaneously, a complete answer to this mystery? Many who believe in UFOs think not. They believe the archives fail to answer the big question. What was the light source that Pat Evans and Hugh Loy saw on the ground? So what Pat saw is an absolute mystery. I have not thought for a second that they were UFOs, although it is something unidentified. It seems that it was on Earth, and if anything it would be an unidentified terrestrial object, but it is a mystery. So between all the hype about aliens and extraterrestrials colliding, and between the truth and the fact of the earthquake and the meteors, what we have is a mysterious sighting of a large, shiny, motionless object on the ground for at least 10 minutes. So, is this case closed for the inhabitants of Bergen? There are still many unanswered questions. I believe that the incident on Bergen Mountain is not a case that many people have forgotten. Some think that the publication of these files is in itself disinformation and that the Ministry of Defense is still hiding a big secret truth about UFOs. The Ministry of Defense has, over time, agreed to publish all UFO files. But will all the secrets be revealed? It seems the public isn't ready to stop believing in them just yet. For some people, UFOs will be with us for quite some time. Well, at least until the real ones show up. Some people suggest that this trickle-down dosing of information being made public about UFOs. He is preparing people for the day when it is announced that these things are actually real.